Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Dan Borsche, coming to you from the lands of the Gadigal people. Coming up, the government responds to the Robodebt Royal Commission with 16 public servants under investigation. New demands on telcos to strengthen cyber security as a major hack cripples Australian supply chains. And the kids aren't all right. The new survey showing young people feel punished by cost of living pressures. Joining me on the panel, former Australian Youth Representative to the United Nations and Youth Advocate Angelica Oginaka. Welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And Nine and Canberra Times columnist and visiting fellow at ANU, Jenna Price. Wonderful to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you.
In Boonah, Queensland, senior reporter at the Saturday paper, Rick Morton. Welcome back. And in Perth, co-chair of Social Reinvestment WA and CEO of the Wunjinning Aboriginal Corporation, Daniel Morrison-Bird. Our first time together on the show, although you've been here a lot. Welcome back.
Great. Thanks for having me.
And you can join us online using the hashtag The Drum, and we live stream on Facebook as well. First tonight, a Royal Commission called it crude and cruel. Now the federal government says it's acting to ensure a scheme such as Robodebt can never happen again. In July, Commissioner Catherine Holmes found the illegal automated debt recovery scheme caused devastating harm on countless victims, making 56 recommendations to improve government processes and oversight. The Attorney-General said today all recommendations will be adopted, either in full or in principle, addressing what he called a shameful chapter in Australian history.
The Robodebt scheme was wrong. The Robodebt scheme was unlawful. The Robodebt scheme destroyed the lives of many innocent Australians. We said we'd act to ensure that nothing like this can ever happen again, and today we take the next step toward delivering on that commitment.
16 bureaucrats are now under investigation by the Public Service Commissioner, while some face civil or criminal prosecution. And Government Services Minister Bill Shorten had this warning for the opposition today.
If I was a former coalition minister, I wouldn't be breathing a sigh of relief that you're out of the woods. It has tarnished a generation of coalition ministers' reputations. They will wear the stigma of Robodebt on their Wikipedia CV for the rest of their lives.
Rick, I want to start with you. It was some of your reporting that revealed really what was going on with Robodebt that led to the calling of the Royal Commission, and you've been doing that comprehensive reporting that's really been bringing all of that information to us throughout what at times has been an incredibly tough and sobering Royal Commission. How did you see today's announcement from the federal government?
I wasn't impressed because I know you mentioned 56 recommendations in your introduction there. There are 57 recommendations. The government has either accidentally or willfully ignored the 57, which I've confirmed independently today via the Royal Commission is a real recommendation. And that was to amend the Freedom of Information Act to make it easier for the public to have line of sight over the kinds of decisions that are being made behind closed doors, and to make it less easy for government to just slap cabinet in confidence on every document to prevent its release to the public. The Attorney-General was asked whether he thought anything of that suggestion, and he said it was just a closing comment from Commissioner Catherine Holmes, and it's not a recommendation, therefore they're not going to pursue it. That's not true. It's a recommendation. So we've started off on, I think, a bad foot when it comes to transparency, particularly given that the lack of access to documents behind Robodebt was one of the key reasons the scheme was allowed to continue for as long as it did, because people just couldn't see what was going on.
Just on that, given that the government is saying that they believe that was a closing comment rather than a recommendation, do you give them the benefit of the doubt that might have been how they read it, or is this simply not possible when you're talking about a Royal Commission?
I think they knew exactly what they were doing. I have some reason to believe that privately, but I won't go into detail, except to say that, the Royal Commission itself refers to 57 recommendations. It's included in the list of recommendations in the drop-down menu on its own website. And failing all of that, they could easily have picked up the phone and asked for clarification. It's not an accident that this is probably the one recommendation that would have caused the most upset across the government in terms of transparency and making lives of ministers a little bit more difficult, because transparency is not good for us. It's not always easy for them, and it's the one thing they've decided carte blanche they're not going to touch. And I just think it's a terrible, terrible look to start off with, particularly given This is their Royal Commission. They called for it. It has done an amazing job via the Royal Commissioner in exposing the truth. And now, when it comes time to put, pen to paper, we're not going to go all the way. It's a real missed opportunity.
Jenna, how do you react to that point, especially about the freedom of information?
Well, it's shocking, and I'm glad Rick's here to point it out to all of us. I hope that some of the other major things will actually be adopted. I love the idea of never having a war on the poor again. I just think that's really a glorious idea. Unfortunately, politicians of all stripes tend to marginalise people who are on welfare. It's like the people on welfare don't deserve the same kind of treatment as everyone else in the community. So that concerns me. And I guess the other principal thing for me, really overarching, is that we have to have a rethink about, and the public service has to have a rethink about how it operates. So it went from being frank and fearless to being, toe suckers. And I just think we have to have a public service that's going to stand up to politicians, and politicians who recognise the power and influence of, and give the due credit to public servants who are actually the only ones here to service. Politicians come and go, the public servants are there forever. And I really appreciated Renee Leon's evidence at the Royal Commission. She made it clear that she'd tried to get something through.
She was the boss there.
Yeah. And she couldn't get anyone to pay any attention. And, surprisingly, that kind of behaviour at the time it happened meant that she didn't have that job anymore. And, I mean, she has since said that she can't confirm that that was why she lost her job, but she did lose her job, has moved on to bigger and better things. But our public service has to return to that original function of being frank and fearless and giving politicians the advice on behalf of all of us.
Yeah. Well, Rick, I wonder what sort of impact the fact that all those 16 public servants referenced by the Royal Commission are being investigated by the Public Service Commissioner. What did you make of that part?
I've always been very fascinated by where this is going to end up because, in my more philosophical moments, I always thought that the real value of this Royal Commission was going to be that it would make senior people, public servants and ministers alike, sit up and pay attention, that it wasn't good enough to say, oh, it's someone else's problem, that if you've got any line of sight over an issue, a policy issue that causes people harm or might cause people harm, then you have an obligation to do something about it. Internally and, if it gets to it, externally. The old medieval head on a stake kind of approach to making a lesson out of this, right? I'm less convinced of that now. When I wrote about the final report when it was released, I had public servants who were named in it as having done the wrong thing and failed in their obligations email me to complain that I'd bothered naming them. It was a real eye-opener because I don't think some of them learnt any lessons. Even with the entire imprimatur of a Royal Commission. I don't know where these 16 code of conduct investigations are going to end up. Certainly, I think there will be many breaches through these channels. But again, there will be a separate process to decide what sanctions apply to these employees. And the range will be from low to high level, including, termination, being sacked. But does that, where does that leave us for the future in terms of enduring lessons? I think one of the things that has really shocked me as a naive layperson from the Queensland backblocks has been this idea that the hierarchy in the public service is so strong that there were people still willing to make the argument that was someone else's job to abide by the law.
Extraordinary. Angelica, for many, the hearings and ultimately the report were shocking, particularly what we saw and heard was that targeting of the most vulnerable who were seeking help and assistance at a time when they really needed it. What do you think is the most important lesson from Robodebt?
There's a bigger overarching lesson, I think, about how we see our social and human services right now, and also the dignity and humanness that's embedded within these systems. It's really clear through this, but also through other experiences I know I've had in the past when I used to be on youth allowance and with other friends who've accessed different supports for some form of security socially in their lives, or for health security as well. is that they aren't human-centred. They don't think enough about the client, the person, the receiver, the beneficiary, the one who needs it the most, like you mentioned, in its design. And then you see things like this, disasters like this happen. And in all honesty, when this first became an issue, when this first got highlighted, I wasn't surprised. And
Why weren't you surprised?
it's this feeling of, well, the systems don't really, like I said, aren't structured with us in mind, and they have so many errors. These errors, as clearly mentioned and laid out now, aren't transparent to the person who is the most vulnerable in the end. And so when things like this happen, you're in shock, yes. But then are we surprised when, again, we're at the bottom of the rung when it comes to priorities, when it comes to matters like this? And that's not to say there aren't people who are working for us and who have been advocating for the most marginalised people, whether it's in the public service or outside of that. But still, I don't think that we've got enough clarity around the way that we design this social security sector at the moment and the systems that support it. And I fear that this will happen again. It's great that there will be recommendations, hopefully put in full, and this missing one, I hope, but do I have full confidence that this won't happen again? I don't know. I would have confidence if I knew that more people who have these direct experiences, those whose lives have been decimated by this, are put at the forefront and their voices are included in the redesign and the processes around what the future looks like going forward. I would have confidence then, but without that, I don't know.
Interesting.
Sorry, I'll go on, Rick.
Just really quickly, one of the recommendations is actually to put, they call them customers, at the centre of the service design in Services Australia. And I note that the government agreed to that only in principle because they are of the view that they're already doing that kind of work in some kind of nebulous cross-government fashion. So even that was kind of like, we'll get around to it. It's not an enthusiastic response, I don't think.
Daniel, I saw you nodding away when Angelica was talking about the challenge if a system is not designed with the person who needs it in mind, and then perhaps the solution is a seat at the table and really being a part of those conversations. How do you see robo-debt and this development today?
Well, definitely from my point of view, and speaking on behalf of the community, that this is a welcomed announcement. Taking Rick's point that there is one recommendation that wasn't acted on, but we would like that all recommendations be fully acted on, because it's hard to hear all this evidence from within the Royal Commission and then not act on it. So I'd hope that all recommendations are acted on in full. The issue of the policies and programs being person-centred, that's something that I believe in and wholeheartedly, that the people that are being affected and impacted by policies, whether it's by Services Australia or whoever else, they need to be part of the developing the policies and programs. So it's hitting the mark. It's meeting the people on the ground that it's really intended for.
And Rick, just before we move on, what do you think needs to happen now? Because there is still a big trust piece, isn't there, that needs to quite a bit of work from the community. I mean, we're hearing that right now.
That is the lesson from all of this, right? Like, I think it's easy to forget what robo-debt was, and it was a program that was not just illegal or accidentally illegal. It was designed to circumvent the law, and it was designed on the assumption that people would pay back false debts. That wasn't an accident. It wasn't an unhappy byproduct. It was the actual design of the program, and that obliterates trust to the horrendous degree that we heard from people on the stand, welfare recipients, who said that they would never apply for Centrelink ever again, because even if they were desperate and homeless, they just wouldn't do it because it ruined them. And that particular psychological harm that comes from a government denying truth and denying reality to its own citizens is the most pernicious and the hardest to unpick, which is why I get really cranky when on the very first day they respond to this stuff, they come out and they're not being completely honest. Or if they are being, if they did make a mistake and say, well, it's not really a recommendation, but do you know what? It is good for transparency to act on this comment, quote unquote, that they view about freedom of information. So, trust is about trust is an eternal thing, right? You can't have it one day and then give up on the work the next day. You've got to consciously be doing it day in, day out. And today, we don't have that. Tomorrow's a new day. Let's start again.
I was really shocked having observed someone at close quarters who got one of these robo-debt demands, and that person just totally went to pieces. They had to summon money from everywhere. And they never questioned it. They didn't push back. They just assumed that if the government was telling them that they owed $6,000, they owed $6,000. And like 2 weeks of panic, 2 weeks of trying to get money from people who didn't have it. It was just hideous. And that should never happen again. And fortunately, that person survived, but so many of them didn't. And that is what we cannot repeat that ever.
No, absolutely. And I'll have the details for where you can get speak to someone in a moment if you need that. I want to go to Western Australia now, though, where there are calls for the state government to close a controversial section of Perth's Casuarina Adult Prison, which houses young people. It's called Unit 18. Last week, Corrective Services Minister Paul Papalia revealed that on the night when Indigenous teenager Cleveland Dodd attempted suicide, prison officers were either resting or watching videos. The teenager died in hospital a week later.
Operational procedures were not followed on the night. Record keeping was poor and not up to standard. Youth custodial officers were not carrying radios. Cleveland was not placed on arms despite making self-harm threats that evening. Individually, none of these things are acceptable. Collectively, they are disturbing and confirm the need for significant cultural change.
Those comments were made on Friday, and the government says Unit 18 will be closed as soon as another suitable location is created, but hasn't put a time frame on that change. Megan Krakauer is an activist and long-time advocate for families of children housed in youth detention facilities. She told The Drum today Unit 18 should be closed immediately.
I had a strong conversation with Nadine Dodd. She's the mum of young Cleveland, rest in peace. She came for answers to Perth. She's managed to get some answers. And she feels a bit more validated. She's obviously still concerned and she's still hurt and she's still preparing for the funeral of young Cleveland. But when you speak to her, you hear the love and the kindness and the strength, and she battled. But what she heard with Mr. Papalia coming out and saying, I accept responsibility for the death of Cleveland Dodd, that brought her to tears. If you're working in the prison system and knowing how many challenges there have been with Unit 18, knowing how many self-harms there have been, you can't be asleep on the job. But the reality is, it's not just a person that was asleep on the job, it was a whole department that was asleep on the job. So the mere fact that the minister came out and basically was able to pinpoint the allegations as to the occurrences of what had gone on was really quite pleasing in that respect. It gave some kind of healing and validation to the family, and that was really quite a powerful indicator in itself. So that showed incredible leadership in that respect. This is all we've been wanting for a number of years, is that validation that hurt and harm has been perpetrated against our people, not only in Banksia Hill Unit 18, but very much the whole carceral estate in Western Australia. I mean, right across this country, a lot of our mob, there hasn't been any accountability for when a person has passed away in a prison setting or in custody for that matter. So this was just an incredible step and displayed incredible leadership. Hang on, we have a problem with Unit 18. We have a problem with Banksia Hill. We need to own this. With Unit 18, I am demanding that it is closed. I'm demanding also that there is nurture, intense psychosocial support, lived experience, seasoned expertise that is taken into that prison to help and support these children.
Well, that was Megan Krakauer speaking to the ABC today. Daniel, before we get into those calls for an immediate shutdown of Unit 18, I wonder if you wanted a moment to reflect on the life of Cleveland Dodd.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Megan Krakauer in everything that she said, and that she's demanding that the Unit 18 be closed immediately. This is something that the community of WA, Aboriginal community, have been calling on. Aboriginal community organisations have been calling on and have been asking and advocating on behalf of the community to government to have this unit closed for some time now. In relation to Cleveland Dodd, may he rest in peace. it's 16 is way too young, and this is something that should, his life and being lost is a tragedy, and that's for sure. But it has been and is preventable. This is something that we need to learn from as a community, as a society, and hopefully government are willing to work with and listen to government and listen to community when we're talking about how serious youth justice is, and how much improvement is needed in relation to youth justice in WA. When I think about Cleveland Dodd, rest in peace, I think about my child. I have two children, a 21-year-old and my son. My son is turning 16 in a couple of weeks. And that is far too young to lose your life and not being able to just focus on your dreams and live healthy and happy life like my children do. Cleveland was not given the opportunity, was not afforded the opportunity to thrive and to be healthy and happy. Even when he was in full government care, he was not given the opportunity to access rehabilitation, get trauma-informed services and programs wrapped around him. Instead, he was put into Unit 18 because he's classed as one of the hardest and most troublesome young people. And then they're being told we don't have enough staff to service you, and so we'll lock you up for 20 plus hours a day. Still limited access to therapeutic support, rehabilitative programs, and just having that one-on-one contact with other people. Anyone, and I've said this on this program before, anyone, no matter what health you are or what age you are, you're locked up for 20 plus hours a day, you are going to lose it. Your mental health will be impacted. And so it's no surprise that we've now seen our first death in custody as far as a child in WA. Because we've been calling on it, we've been dreading this moment for many, many months. The last 2 years, for example, youth justice system in WA has been failing our young people, and we can do better. Our young people deserve better.
When you say that you've really been dreading this, I wonder if you can give us a sense of what you're hearing from your community there in Western Australia, and is this response enough from the government?
As far as the response from community members, both families of those young people, both in Banksia Hill and in Unit 18, is that the lockdown hours, the up to 20 hours confined to their cell, is still happening, and that's something that we would hope to have gotten better from by now. Only last week we had another young person self-harm, tried to commit suicide. And so we're still in the same predicament where we're feeling unsafe with our children and young people in Unit 18. We need that unit to be closed immediately, and better services, better support and systems to ensure that our young people are protected and serviced and supported, so they can come out into the community. They can live to achieve their dreams, and become healthy, happy and participating adults in our community. So it's a long way from over. There's a lot of work to be done, a lot of improvements in relation to the youth justice system, but there's an easy win, and that's to close Unit 18. We need the state government with our new Premier, Roger Cook, and our new Minister, Paul Papalia. We've seen some great steps forward where they're wanting to work with the Aboriginal community and the Aboriginal sector, but that has to be continued. There's still a lot of room for improvement, and we would hope that we can continue to develop ways of how we can work together and collaborate to work in ensuring that youth justice in WA is improved. It's far from perfect right now.
Angelica, one of the things that Megan touched on was the need for there to be nurture, for care. So you visibly react. What are you thinking?
I think this whole country is asleep when it comes to child rights. We have no understanding right now as to where we're at with child rights. And I reacted that way when Megan mentioned nurture and care, because that is fundamental to what child rights is all about. It's why we've ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, but yet we see in exactly what was just described right now, a lack of care, a lack of nurture, a lack of care particularly to how child rights is applied to each and every system that children, young people, families, all people who care for young people navigate. And it's just, it honestly, this issue, this human rights abuse of how children and young people are treated in detention and in so-called justice. Clearly there was no justice achieved because rest in peace Cleveland, his life is now lost. There's clearly no care and nurture at all. There's people who have been fighting and who have paved the way and provided essentially a very clear path to how we can actually transform this area of our overall system and our overall approach to supporting young people and their well-being. But those are collecting dust right now. And there's not enough willpower, there's not enough political energy right now to actually enact those recommendations, enact the change that young people themselves are crying out for, and it seriously makes my blood boil. I sit here and I'm just like, I'm really frustrated that, you know, we continue to not include the voices of young people who have direct experience of criminalisation in this country enough to take this issue seriously.
Well, that political energy, Jenna, is pretty important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because
and speaking of gathering dust, let me take everyone back to the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, which is, 30 plus years now?
Yeah.
How is it that those findings said caution first, arrest later, much later as a last resort? I was speaking to Antoinette Braybrook, who runs GIRA, which is a domestic violence service in Victoria, and she has told me this story a couple of times, and I rang her today just to get, the ideas in order. But when she was a young woman, she was arrested for having a hair-pulling fight on the street with another young woman. I have had hair-pulling fights when I was 15 myself. No one arrested me. The other young woman involved was a white woman. Antoinette and her friend were arrested and convicted, and her parents decided to appeal. And so the conviction was overturned. But we're in a situation now where we are still treating black kids and white kids so differently. One gets off more lightly than the other. Now and even before we get to prison, we've got that injustice happening at that very moment. And can I just say, it's horrendous hearing about what's happening in WA, but Aboriginal deaths in custody to people of all ages happens in every single state and territory, and it's not improving. We've known what to do for a long time and we're still not doing it. So I keep hoping one day I'll wake up and there will be a shift in consciousness. I don't know how we do that because we've been making a fuss for a long time.
I wonder what drives that shift in consciousness, because, Rick, we know that the politics around young people in prisons and justice is so fraught, and so often, generally speaking, across the nation, it gets used as a tool, a political tool when it comes to elections. And just last week, the Minister was defending the government's response there in WA over the death of Cleveland Dodd, saying that this came after Mr Dodd's mother had accused the Minister of lying about what happened on the night of Cleveland's death. So then, even around the conversations that I had, the politics of this is so fraught, isn't it?
And we're seeing it, like I'm in Queensland, and there is a youth crime issue in Queensland, but the way it's sensationalised in the media and the solutions that politicians think they have because the population is begging for something to be done, but the easiest thing to do is to just lock kids up. That's the solution we're given. And there's no nuance in any of this. I mean, Angelica's right. They're children, right? I mean, the love and nurture that kids require, frankly, up until the age of 25, because, their brains are developing, right? The idea that you can just put them in a cell for 20 plus hours a day and think that alone is going to make them better, let alone the fact that it might make them worse, is ridiculous. But we don't have a political climate in this country where we're actually allowed to say these things without someone being accused of being soft on crime or, a bleeding heart social justice warrior. And it's like, well, frankly, I don't care anymore about those terms being thrown around. We actually need to do something to fix the social problems where they begin and not exacerbate them. Arresting people out of poverty doesn't work. It never has worked. It won't work again in the future. It's time to reset and do something completely different.
Yep.
But we're not going to until we're happy to reset those conversations. And that starts, frankly, with people like myself, journalists and the media, allowing people to have a proper conversation without jumping at the next gotcha.
And just to add on where this starts as well, it doesn't start at when we get the news of a death.
No, it's too late.
It's way too late. We really need to look at young people and the ecosystems that they live in and the worlds that they're navigating right now way, way before they even make any kind of contact with any sort of system. It is mind-blowing when in my journey last year when I spoke with young people about the issues that they care about, this came up consistently, that we're not doing enough when it comes to youth justice. But the thing that young people pointed to was if you speak with children, even as young, when they're in kindy, right, you can pick up on things that may come up later on in their world that is happening right now for them that can actually, we can start to really develop a more whole of system approach and whole of life experience approach that actually avoids young people being in contact with these systems. I also really don't, if we're going to change anything, I think we seriously need to rethink the idea of opening up a new place that just operates exactly 100%. The same. It is that would be abhorrent, and that would be no justice at all to Cleveland's life if that ever happened.
Daniel, I'll give you just the last word on this.
Yeah, just that it's not a political issue; it's a social justice issue, and something that we're seeing it as a political issue. Every premier we've had, it keeps talking about it, and now we've got the minister and the department talking about a new facility. Like already been said, we don't need another facility. If we're serious about justice reinvestment, social reinvestment, it's about reducing the facilities that we do have and doing more preventative and front-end solutions to ensure young people don't end up in the criminal justice system, and that they certainly don't end up in a Banksy Hill Youth Detention Centre or, in fact, Unit 18. We need a lot more work done with families and with young people so we can prevent this from happening. So, as already said, it's well before a death occurs. And now that one has, there's many, many learnings and lessons that we can take out of this and ensure that our young people that are involved in caught up in the youth justice system are treated well, treated with therapeutic and trauma-informed services and programs, but also getting the rehabilitation that they deserve so they can come out to the community and participate and be healthy and happy, just like my children and other people's children. Like this is a small number of young people that are being caught up in the youth justice system. We as a society can do better, and we must do better.
Yeah, and if these two discussions we've had so far have raised any issues for you, please call Lifeline on 13 11 14 or 13 Yarn on 13 92 76. Well, after a massive cyber attack threatened to cripple Christmas supply chains, the federal government today announced reforms to strengthen the country's cybersecurity defences. Ports operator DP World, which manages 40% of the Australian freight task, was brought down by hackers on Friday, with services slowly resuming today.
The DP World incident also, Speaker, shows that some of the critical reforms that our government has put in place in the past 18 months are actually working. The implications for a shutdown, even briefly, on the ports are very widespread, affecting most of the parts of the Australian economy. We've got a big mess to clean up here, but there's lots of work underway, and I'm proud of the work that's been done so far.
The government will mandate reporting for companies hit by ransomware attacks and force telecommunication providers to share their cybersecurity strategies with authorities. The reforms were sparked by last year's cyber attacks on Optus, which compromised the personal data of 10 million customers. The Optus network outage last week also exposed serious vulnerabilities, with the new laws to classify telcos as critical infrastructure for the first time. Vanessa Teague is CEO of Thinking Cybersecurity and Hand, an Associate Professor at ANU's College of Engineering and Computer Sciences, and joins us now. Welcome to the program.
Hello.
How would you characterise Australia's cybersecurity defences as they stand right now?
Bit of an embarrassing mess, really, aren't we? I think that we've got a bunch of different parts of the Commonwealth Government running in a bunch of different directions, and the end result is not very well organised.
So, pretty clear, a bit of a miss. As part of this new raft of proposed laws, companies are going to have to report if they've fallen victim to an attack. Is that enough?
I sincerely doubt it. So, first of all, we don't have a great deal of detail on what this is going to say, but just based on the article that was in The Australian earlier today, it looks like they're going to have to report ransomware attacks to the government, mark you, not necessarily to the people affected by the data breach. And it looks as if the government did not proceed with the move that might actually have made a difference, which was banning ransomware payments. So the Australian says, while the government strongly discourages Australians from paying ransoms, which is often cheaper and faster for companies, it will not ban payments following talks with business leaders. In other words, they've decided they didn't have the spine to do the thing that might actually have had a chance of improving protections for data by changing the incentives, because business leaders talked them into continuing to allow the cheaper, faster thing that allows business leaders to hide the problem.
So what is then the responsibility on companies, and what do companies need to be doing to make sure that this is not something that gets talked about afterwards, but about prevention beforehand?
Yeah, prevention beforehand is, I think, a really important theme. I think we should have much better, stronger rules for incentivising prevention beforehand. I think of all the things that the different parts of the federal government is doing, the reforms to the Privacy Act are probably the thing that's going to do the best for our privacy and security, if that lands with some spine, because giving businesses a financial penalty associated with data breaches is the thing that will incentivise preemptive defensive measures.
So who's doing it best, and where are they? Which countries are we talking about?
Actually, that's a really good question. So part of what's a bit silly, frankly, about some of what is coming out of Home Affairs is the belief that we're going to be the most cyber-secure nation by 2030, which I guess everybody has heard, and I hope everybody has had a bit of a good laugh, because that's not going to happen in that length of time. What we could be doing is looking at what the more technically informed countries are doing. I wouldn't say that there's any country that's perfect, but I would say that there are countries with much more of a tradition of technical education, technical input into public policy, and transparency about technical infrastructure than Australia. Companies like Switzerland, which has laws, requirements mandating, for example, that their internet voting system has to be open source and openly available to scrutiny. Estonia has very detailed, technically informed technical infrastructure. Again, neither of these countries is perfect, but there's a theme in Australia that we don't speak openly about the technical detail of stuff that happened, and we don't put people with technical expertise into a position where they can actually solve some of those problems.
Well, there's a strong theme tonight around transparency. Rick, I wonder, do you get a bit of an impression that we are running a different race or running behind when it comes to the types of regulations and processes around how we collectively as a society deal with cyber and cybersecurity?
Things on that. Firstly, I think Vanessa is probably the most refreshingly honest guest we've ever had on this program. I love you, Vanessa. And I have, and the second important thing for this conversation is that I know almost nothing about this area, except that I did write about the Medibank attack, a couple of months ago. And we really are so far behind the eight ball in this country. And it starts, with people like myself. My own approach to security, and a lot of my peers, I've got a couple of contacts in cybersecurity, and they are just like, can you please, for the love of God, use a proper password manager can you please, for the love of God, at least put two-factor authentication on your accounts? Probably not enough anymore, but at least do that. And then that goes right through to the top. And I think it's not just that we don't put people with technical skills in positions where they can solve these problems, but we also don't allow people with technical expertise to communicate to the public when something goes wrong. There's a lot of these motherhood statements and kind of glossing over things. And I think that treats the Australian public as a little bit silly, and that, we can all be a little bit more honest and maybe make some progress if we actually trust each other with some information for a change, ironically, when the issue is about losing access to treasured information.
Yeah. Angelica, I wonder if you see the conversation here is really about us not keeping pace with change. Artificial intelligence is increasing at a rate of knots. So are those that want to do damage through cyber attacks. Where do you see is what do you see as the key challenge here?
Well, as one of those young people who is not that technologically savvy, I think for me, at least, I'm catching up and trying to pay attention to what all these changes are. I mean, everything that happened with Optus, all I know is that Optus went down. I don't know the technicalities of, what that involves.
Which
and what
is important to
that
note. Wasn't a cyber attack, was a whole other issue. But it's still aligned in our minds, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a broader conversation around technology, cyber, the internet,
absolutely.
AI, all of that, right? And I think that for me, what I would love is, this idea of more technical people with the technical expertise and knowledge to actually provide the education to young people, to the families they support, etc. I feel like if we start to, like what has mentioned, have a bit more of a honest conversation as to where we're at and not be afraid to be like, oh, I actually don't know, how to actually keep my account secure or how to protect my phone or my computer from viruses. And for young people, I know for me, I hate admitting that I don't know stuff in this area, but being honest about it, I think that providing that technical education will really help in a way that's also meets communities where they're at right now with this too. I think that will be well received, and I know for a fact that this is something that is really important. Like, if I can give an example, my brother will hate me for giving this example. He came to me with he's got what seems to be a secure kind of password and everything like that, but somehow this scam got into his phone and was offering a $4 iPhone, and he came to me and was like, oh, is this legit? And I said, well, clearly not. In what world is anyone offering a $4? I wish.
Too good to be true.
Yeah, too good to be true. But obviously this type of scam came through on his social media account, and he actually had clicked the link and was petrified. Luckily, in his case, nothing was hacked any further or anything like that, touch wood. But it's the thing that even young people who are supposedly meant to know all this and supposedly meant to be really on top of the ball when it comes to cybersecurity actually need the support. And for me, I didn't really know where I was, if there was a scam or if there was something, if he was defrauded in any way, I didn't know where to point him in the right direction. So, yeah.
Jenna, this what happened last week with Optus, different, but there's still linked in our minds. Did that put pressure on the government to do something now, particularly when we talk about the communication of it, or perhaps it's better to define it as the lack of communication about it?
A couple of things. I think that the Optus disaster put that front of mind for the government. There's no question that everyone freaked out. A lot of those people needed to ring 000 from their landlines, couldn't ring 000 from their landlines. Where was Kelly Rosmarin, whatever her name is, from Optus?
Kelly Bayer Rosmarin.
Yeah, I've got it all the wrong way around. But where was she for hours and hours? Completely disappeared. And I mean, the great thing is that Claire O'Neill was calling for her to speak, which was great.
As was Michelle Rowland.
Michelle Rowland calling for her to speak. Since then, we've had it all put on the agenda now, saying we have to have this as critical infrastructure. That's going to fix a whole lot of things. But I will say, and this is why I was confused about Claire O'Neill, but I think she's really smart. I think she's got a few issues dealing with caucus in trying to get them to do everything she wants, which is why we're not getting the fines that we're meant to be having. I think if she can pull it off and do it all in the amount of time, then she'll be the next Prime Minister. I don't have a lot of confidence that this is going to happen, but my fingers are crossed, because we all felt terribly vulnerable last week. And I have to say, even though I didn't know what was happening at these ports, I began to think, what's the next few months of my life going to be like? Am I going to be able to get this or get that? I've got a grandson who needs to have an EpiPen. I wondered whether that would be held up on the ports. So I think that these two issues are really coming together at a really good time for us, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to do what Vanessa suggests, which is to find them and make them tell us what's going on, because often the big problem is that no one ever tells us. We are kept in the dark. We are mushrooms.
Or we're not, it's not explained and we don't have a conversation about it. Daniel, I wonder what your views are about this, and is there a need for some sort of an oversight mechanism that is transparent?
Yeah, definitely. And I would look to government to see that we need someone to firmly regulate the systems around cybersecurity. But also, this is a great example of what we can expect going forward if it's not dealt with now. Like Jen said, we might be shopping around for toilet paper in coming weeks again and find nothing on the shelves, depending on what's on the what's on the ports. But we might also want to look at this situation as a chance to look at how we can better it going forward. If we look at it as a piece of infrastructure rather than social media and internet banking, how we should protect it as infrastructure. We should be making sure that everyone is safe to be able to do so, and we can have faith and trust in the systems that make sure that the system's safe. It's similar to how we looked at terrorism and the strategies and practices that we put in around every airport across the world. We should be having similar systems and processes to ensure that cybersecurity is secure and that we're all protected going forward.
Can I ask Vanessa a question?
Oh, go on.
What about facial recognition on our phones? Is that a good thing? Is that what we should all be doing now?
I think it depends how well you remember what the PIN that you would otherwise use to log into your phone.
Yeah.
I don't use it because I'm quite happy remembering a very long PIN. But if you're not happy remembering a long PIN, I don't think it's a bad thing. I see a huge difference between facial recognition of yourself on your own device, where the image of you for recognition purposes stays on your own device, and similarly with fingerprint, which some people also use, versus biometrics that are used where you give your fingerprint or whatever to a third party and they use it to. That's clearly a bad idea.
And there's a real...
When it's on your own device, I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea. I think it depends on the implementation. It depends on what else you'd be doing instead.
Sigh of relief here on the panel, Vanessa. But as we're talking about these big things that are happening, so the DP World over the weekend, Optus, not a hack, but a different system error last week. This is putting a lot of pressure or bringing to the forefront the vulnerabilities. That can only be actually a good thing, can't it, in terms of having a big conversation about how do we ward off and protect against these, or as Daniel was saying, how we're getting an insight of what might happen. So surely that's where we've got to be having this conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I actually agree really strongly with what Angelica said. If I was writing the cybersecurity strategy, I would put education at the centre of it. And that would be everything from, tertiary education of people doing PhDs in cryptography to 5-year-olds learning not to tell random strangers on the internet where they live. And I think if that was the centrepiece of our strategy, people actually learning how to defend themselves, then I think we'd be in a much better position. I'm concerned that a lot of policy at the moment is oriented around surveillance and the superior power of government, which is sometimes a good idea, but sometimes actually a bad idea, particularly if we're talking about child protection, for example. There's a lot of the ideas that come out of the E-Safety Commission, for example, are much more oriented around surveillance rather than education about self-defence. And I actually think firstly, it's dumb, and secondly, it's actually a human rights issue, especially for teenagers. They should actually be learning how to communicate securely with the people they want to.
Education is key to everything, isn't it? I think it's a really good point. Vanessa Teague, CEO of Thinking Cybersecurity, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, to the health or continuing perhaps to the health and wellbeing of young Australians. Would you believe that 9 in 10 young Australians have experienced financial difficulties in just the past year, while 1 in 5 don't have secure access to food? That's according to Monash University's Youth Barometer, a survey of 500 people aged between 18 and 24. Here's report author Professor Lucas Walsh.
This year's findings, unfortunately, are much darker than last year's findings. We've seen mental health concerns go up. We've seen persistent levels of food insecurity. So 1 in 5 young Australians say that they weren't able to access nourishing, healthy or culturally appropriate foods. We're also seeing a rise in feelings that they'll be worse off than their parents. So we've seen about a 13% uptick from just over 50% last year. On other indicators, they're faring much worse. And we're talking about things like affordable accommodation, finding secure, desirable work, satisfaction with education. Just over 50% felt as though their education was preparing them for the future. I think one of the most troubling figures is that there is a significant proportion who feel like they're missing out on being young. We think these might be related to other things like not being able to access food or being financially insecure. 90% experience some sort of financial insecurity, which is enormous and really quite striking. So we think that these economic and other factors are entangling to affect their experiences on what it means to be young. Young people are asking to meet them halfway. They are highly engaged, much more active, for example, in voluntary activities than people give them credit for, around 3/4. But we want to listen to them, to meet them halfway and to actively incorporate them into our decision making because their voices are important and they constitute a large and significant proportion of society that are also going to be carrying our society forward.
Angelica, 9 in 10 young Australians had some financial distress in the past year. Did that surprise you?
Not at all. I think anecdotally from just friends or in the places and spaces that I navigate, that seems to be a consistent conversation that a lot of people, is not to say that financial management and having to figure out your finances isn't something that we all do, but the struggle, the negotiation of what is a priority to put your money to now versus what is not is becoming increasingly stark, and it is alarming to me the amount of young people who are having to negotiate whether or not food is actually something that they need each and every day at different points in the day for them to survive. So that statistic, I think, reflects something that has been an ongoing conversation, not just when the pandemic happened, but prior to that. Young people have been raising this conversation that when our mental health is better, it's usually when we're financially better. It's usually when our families are supported. And as a young carer, I know exactly what that feels like when you have to weigh up what is a financial priority for yourself and for your family, but then how much that can take a toll on your overall well-being and just how you go about your day-to-day. So not surprising at all that that's the number right now. Yeah,
Rick, you've done a lot of social affairs reporting. One of the shocking findings was that 20% of young people didn't have secure access to food, which Angelica was there alluding to really there. This really goes then to what kind of sacrifices are Australians having to make just to get by?
I find this really difficult to think about still, because I remember, what it was like when I was going through university and I didn't have all of the support from my family that some people would have in a similar, in a middle-class environment, but then also what my mum had to go through. And I remember writing about this in my first book, and there are food deserts in Tasmania, where the price of fresh fruit and veg is prohibitively expensive, despite the fact that a lot of it comes from that same region in which people live. And so it's not just about access to food, but even now the access to stuff that isn't nourishing is becoming really difficult for young people. And so you're paying a price, to get enough to fill your belly, but you're paying the price then in terms of the health costs, because it is more expensive to feed a single person on fresh produce than it is to get something quick and easy and cheap. And so I struggle thinking about with the fact that this is a problem now, right? But the more that this crunch hits young people and the harder we make things for young people, the more it reflects what's going to happen to their kids when they get older, because we're pushing through the generations and making that chain of support harder to access because each successive generation is being punished. And it hurts me because I think we can all see it coming.
Yeah.
But we aren't stopping.
Yeah, well, that it really goes to that kind of intergenerational trauma and the long-term impact that can have. Daniel, we know that when we see reports like this, often Indigenous young people that are doing it tough are way worse. What's been your experience?
Yeah, and that was going to be my questions. I haven't yet seen the detail of the report and how it impacts or how it captures the young Aboriginal people. But that was going to be my next point, that when Rick's talking about Tasmania, where we have a lot of the same in Western Australia, like the food security and the Kimberleys, the opportunities for work and employment and training and education is not there, and is not there for most young people. The cost of living in WA, whether it's in the Kimberleys or whether it's in Perth Metro, the availability of housing, whether you want to rent or purchase, these are all things that need to be considered, and for young people coming through the to becoming adults and participating in our community. They're very lacking. We've got a 0.6 vacancy rate in Perth as we speak, and we've got a lot of people coming in from our interstate. And so for young people coming through, the cost of living is one thing. The cost of buying your own house, your first house, is at least $500,000. The rental market rents in Perth and in the region especially are ridiculous.
Yeah.
So
and
I don't know.
it compounds too, doesn't it? Jenna, we've got a minute left.
Yep.
You've got a solution on housing.
I do have a solution, and I've had this idea before. There are 13 million spare bedrooms in Australia. A lot of those spare bedrooms are in the houses of boomers. Every single boomer needs to take in a young person or two. There is no point having a sewing machine in your spare bedroom when you could be solving the housing crisis and supporting the generation that's going to make our future. I think that's crucial. So step up, do it in exchange for cleaning the shower, and you will improve Australia dramatically.
Perhaps even build a bit of community.
Build a better community, most importantly.
Good approach.
Yeah.
I agree.
There you go. Well, I think a solution, I'm not sure how widely that'll be taken up, but a way to finish us on a pretty big conversation tonight. Thank you so much to the panel, Angelica Ojinaka, Jenna Price, Rick Morton and Daniel Morrison-Bird. Do have an excellent evening. Julia Baird will be back in the hot seat with you tomorrow. For now, though, good night.